Hi, and welcome to Alive with Chronic Illness, a podcast dedicated to exploring what it's like to live with and not in spite of chronic illness. Amy's here today to share her experience of living with chronic illnesses and her journey to finding peace and acceptance. Thank you so much for joining me today, Amy. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Amy Corfeli. My pronouns are she, her. And like you said, I have endometriosis and I have multiple chronic illnesses. I have been living with symptoms since I was 17, and this year I'm going to be 40. So I guess that's 23 years, a really long time to a really long time to not feel good every single day. Which is why, I'm trying to be really focused on accepting my illness, integrating my illness into my life, finding tools for coping. And I also consider myself dynamically disabled as well. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. Would you like to share what your journey to diagnosis was like?
Oof, I feel like whenever you talk to an endometriosis patient, their journey to diagnosis is long. So I'll spare you the 16 years of details. That's how long it took to get diagnosed with endometriosis. But I will highlight that, like many endometriosis patients, I began having a full array of symptoms all over my body. I had painful periods. I mean, hey, well, you know what? That's like an understatement. I had excruciating periods that I was terrified of, that I ended up getting, PTSD from, because it's the kind of pain that sends you to the floor, vomiting and screaming and just begging for the pain to stop. So we're talking like really traumatic pain experiences every single month, like clockwork. I had leg pain. It just began one day when I was 17 years old, and it didn't stop for 7 years. So, a lot of pain all over my body, full body pain, even my arms, my fingers. I swear sometimes my fingernails ached, and that can be from, I think in my case, from the systemic inflammation that you can get with endometriosis. But not to mention all of the issues with the bodily functions. So, talking about bladder urgency, frequency. I was having incontinence as well. The same with my bowels. Like I was having diarrhea 25 times a day. Suddenly I became allergic and intolerant to like every food, like ever. And all these things felt like they just happened overnight. Maybe there was a slow, gradual process, but I definitely know for me, like one day I was in high school and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't feel good. Like I felt like I had a tummy ache and, I lost my appetite. And then within just like a week, it was just this onslaught of like all these symptoms. And I think one of those, it's so hard when you just suddenly are catapulted out of your like regular normal routine in your life to a place of symptoms that are so overwhelming, so overbearing, and suddenly like you can't live your life, like you can't go to school or you can't work, you're canceling plans, you're getting fired from your job because of all your absences. And you just see your life like shutting down, shrinking, and you have no idea what's going on. And you have no idea why. And it's so scary. And I know in my own case, because I was just a teenager when all that started. So I didn't have any tools, right? I didn't have any tools to cope or to handle it. Or so for me, it was really hard because I really fell into a depression. I fell into like a kind of a victim mentality mindset, like, why me? Why me? And that's a valid question, like, why me? But now over the years, I've come to realize that like my suffering isn't unique and that many people across the world have chronic illness, have disability. But I didn't know that at the time, right? Because in the world that I was living in, which was my high school, I didn't see anyone who was like apparently sick or apparently disabled. So I was just like that weird one suddenly getting made fun of. I was suddenly the sick one. Oh, Amy's the sick girl. Oh, Amy's the girl who's always in the bathroom, right? You start getting labeled as a weirdo, as a freak, as the different one. I started drawing into myself. And all this time I was going to the doctor for the first 2 years, going to gastrointestinal doctor, gynecologist, bladder doctor, what's the word, urologist, going to all these different doctors, infectious diseases. Like my parents, they tried to get answers, but every single time we went to the doctor, we were either told we run the tests and they would say, there's nothing wrong with you. Or they would say, oh, she's just a teenager. She's probably just being dramatic. Or they would say periods are supposed to be painful. And I guess no. And I guess you're just supposed to fall on the ground screaming and pooping yourself during your period. No, you're not, right? But that's like, are you serious? Periods are just painful? No, they're not. So yeah, all this time you're dealing with all of those symptoms. You're dealing with your life shrinking around you. And then what I saw after like 2 years of not getting any answers was that people stopped believing me, right? Like my parents stopped believing me. My friends, well, that time I had fallen out with all of my friends because I think at that age, at least in my friend group, like no one wanted to deal with someone who was sick all the time, canceling plans, running to the toilet. So yeah, the withdrawal of support and I think that for me is one of the hardest things about taking 16 years to be diagnosed and being undiagnosed all of that time is that the lack of validation of what I was going through. You're going through the hardest thing you've ever gone through in your life, but everyone around you is telling you that you're making it up. It's not real and it's not as bad as you say. And no one around you is giving you compassion. No one is giving you a gentle hug. No one is holding your hand or saying, it's okay that you missed these plans or, we're going to figure it out. Everyone's just saying, like, buck up, sit up straight, go to school. So, yeah, that's a little bit about my diagnosis story.
Yeah, and that must have been, well, I don't think even hard. It doesn't even incredibly hard before it doesn't even begin to cover it. Like going through all of that and then not being believed. And I definitely have had my experiences of that as well. And it's so hard when you're just feeling so awful and people are telling you to just sort of keep going, stay positive, but you're suffering every single day and you don't know why. And it's scary and very isolating.
Yeah, I think isolating is a really good word for it. And it was only when I got diagnosed like 16 years later and still now, I was diagnosed 6 years ago and I've done a lot of inner work since then, but I also started doing a lot of work before I was diagnosed, like about probably 10 years into being sick. I began doing a lot of inner work and like looking at my thought patterns, looking at what I believed about myself, what I believed about my body, looking at my lack of self-compassion and my love for my self-criticism and like looking at all these ways that I was thinking and dealing with my life. And what I know now, like 23 years in and with a diagnosis is that the psychological impact of not having a diagnosis but in combination with not being believed was so immense. Like, by the time I was 30 years old, I would barely talk. If people talked to me, I would just respond in a whisper because I had gotten all these messages from society and from people around me, and not just my like direct, family or like my partner, my friends, and things like that. Again, like, oh, you're the weird one, you're the needy one. All of my access needs that I now know were disability needs. Things like, having a specific diet, or when I go on vacation overnight, I actually bring like this big foam in the biggest suitcase that you can bring on an airplane. I roll this enormous foam and then I just like shove in like 3 outfits around it because that's all that fit. Because my body, the inflammation was so high that like I could not sleep on anything but like a giant piece of foam. And when I got married, we went on our honeymoon and I ended up leaving the hotel at 3 in the morning because I was in like full body pain because of just like the mattress that was on. And it wasn't even they're not even like, you'd think I was sleeping on a rock or something. No, I was sleeping on just like a normal mattress. So I had like all these things that I had adapted over the years that I needed, but then I was being labeled as the needy one. And now I look back and I'm like, wow, I'm not needy. Like I'm so proud of how I realized I need this to get through my day, or I need this to be successful, or I need this to just like survive the night. And I brought it with me. I identified it. I brought it with me. So you see now the difference is like I look at the things I do with such pride. I'm so proud of the way that I have learned to handle 23 years of chronic pain. I was in chronic pain every day for 20 years. Now, luckily, I've been chronic pain free for 4 years. I still have a lot of symptoms, but chronic pain is not one of them. But back, when I was in my teens, my 20s, everything I did, I was so ashamed. I was so ashamed to pull out my Tupperware with my food when the people around me were eating in a restaurant. And I had like my little home cooked meal because I was allergic to like, all these ingredients because of like the endo and the food intolerances and blah, blah, blah. Like there was so much shame that permeated my being during that time because of the invalidation, the lack of diagnosis, the comments people made about what a weirdo and a freak and a needy and you're so special and blah, blah, So yeah, the impact of not being believed is is immense. It really is.
Yeah, it's huge. And there's so much shame that society pushes onto us that is not ours to carry. And it can be incredibly hard, like when you're navigating chronic illness, chronic pain, food intolerances, and this is just like what you need to do, like you're saying, get your Tupperware, your food, so that you could be safe. But other people see it as, I guess, an inconvenience, even though it's an access need, it's essential. But it feels like that. And I definitely, like myself, like every time I need something or I need some kind of accommodation, it just feels like this massive inconvenience for other people, as if it's not an inconvenience for me that I need to make all these changes just to live.
Yeah, that's something that really helped me a lot in the last few years is learning about ableism, right? Like learning about the societal attitudes towards people who don't fit the quote unquote norm. And in this case would be like with disability, with our bodies, right? Like with disability and chronic illness, learning about the social model versus the medical model. And the medical model saying like, okay, I'm broken, I'm the defect because like I can't sleep on a regular mattress and, eat whatever food is put in front of me and all these other things. And the social model is like, no, like society, step up and like cater to people who have different bodies. And that was so pivotal for me, I think, was understanding all these, different forms of systemic oppression. Also things like, racism and ageism and just all these different ways that society puts expectations on us as human beings that are not achievable, not fair, that are like racist and prejudiced and discriminate against us. And I think that was a big change in mindset for me because all this time I just had thought I am the broken one because that's what you hear over and over. Your tests are normal. And then everyone calling you a weirdo, you're special, blah, blah, blah. They're not like, oh my God, you're so special. Like, oh, you're so special. I hate that word. Eliminate it from the dictionary. And so all this time, I thought I am the problem. And then learning I am not the problem. The broken medical system that couldn't diagnose me with a really serious disease that the NHS called in 2018 in the top 20 most painful conditions a person can suffer. Endometriosis is notorious for being extraordinarily painful. And there I am every month, rolling around. I wouldn't even call it rolling, like basically thinking I was dying in utter agony, and the medical system couldn't diagnose me. I mean, how many excruciating painkillers did I go through before I was diagnosed? I would probably say over 300, right? So, like, how is that acceptable? It's not. And so, learning and like coming to find my voice, right? And coming to understand, like, I'm not the problem. There's all these things wrong with our society, with our medical system, with the way like that we don't support people, and how did all this come to be? Because pulling back all those layers, is like pulling back the layers of why is endometriosis so underfunded, like misogyny, like there's just so many layers to it. And so once I began like pulling back those layers, I was like, oh my God, like I'm not broken. And I am this incredible human being that is so strong and so resilient. And like, I shouldn't have to be. And there's so many times when I don't want to be, but like I am. And I think for me, now I'm trying to help other people like find that in themselves, right? And like find this confidence that maybe they lost, or like find their voice to speak up, because I don't want to live in fear anymore. I don't want to live in fear of my body. I lived in fear of my bodily functions. I lived in literal fear of menstruating, pooping, peeing, eating, having sex. All of that was excruciatingly painful. All of that caused me symptoms and problems for 20 years of my life. I don't want to live in fear anymore. And I don't want to live in fear of asking for what I need. If I'm out and you make fun of my Tupperware, I'm going to say, go away, but in different words. Right? Like, I don't care anymore. I don't want to be afraid of asking for what I need. I don't want to be afraid of being myself. And of course, there is privilege in saying I want to be able to be myself because, I am a white cishet woman. So like in society, I maybe have it a little easier to be who I am than other people who are facing, discrimination or racism or homophobia. But I want that freedom and that courage and that strength to be who I am, and especially around my chronic illness and disability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is so much strength and resilience, and like you touched on there, like we shouldn't have to be strong, but there is so much strength that comes from living with chronic illness, because you have no choice really. And I often feel like some days I'm just like in awe of my strength and what I can achieve. And other days it's almost like I'm just horrified by the strength I've had to gain. I guess we can kind of go on to your website in 16 years. And I think this feeds into really well what you've already said. But I'd love to hear a bit more about why you launched the website and where you're going next with the project.
Yeah. So, I do consider myself, well, it's like a hobby or like an alter ego. I don't know. But I am an endometriosis advocate. That has become really important to me after diagnosis, because it was once I was finally diagnosed, not even officially, just a doctor was like, I think you have endometriosis. And I was like, oh my God, a word that I can now like plug into Google and plug into social media. And, a big issue with endometriosis, and I'm not sure with other diseases, but notoriously with endometriosis, is there's so much misinformation. And this misinformation even comes from our doctors. And unfortunately, many patients across the world are hurt by the lack of knowledge of their doctors, told, oh, this is going to be a great treatment option for you. And it's not even a treatment for endometriosis. Things like go get pregnant, have a hysterectomy, or they're told, take these hormonal medications that put you in medical menopause, but there's almost no side effects, right? Like I firsthand have been hurt by doctors who are ignorant and uneducated about the disease. And again, pulling back the layers of that onion, I mean, that comes down to lack of education in medical school. That comes down to lack of funding, lack of resources, lack of interest in diseases that primarily affect women and people assigned female at birth. So, there's a lot of reasons, and this isn't like pinpointing, like, obviously there are doctors who are just jerks as well and have big egos, but it's like a systemic problem within the medical system that the majority of doctors do not know what they're talking about with endometriosis. And so when I saw that like most of what I learned came from other patients, I was like, I want to be part of that. So yeah, I have basically my platform in 16 years of endometriosis. This is both a website, a podcast, and my Instagram page. And then I also have a book recently that I came out with. But yeah, it's basically just talking about, I think, everything. It's like talking about everything I've learned in 16 years to diagnosis and of course after, but there's a big focus on, of course, disease facts. Like we want to learn about this disease so that we can make empowered decisions, have informed consent. But then there's so much focused on like mindset. And I don't mean mindset like, oh, we just got to be positive and like strong. I just mean mindset like in terms of how can we find tools to cope? What are our thought patterns, right? Like, how are we thinking about our illness, ourselves? Are we seeped in shame? Are we critical with ourselves? Are we kind with ourselves? All of these things that I think, sometimes with chronic illness and disability, there's things that I just don't have control over and that I can't change, right? Like endometriosis is incurable. I can't change that. There are things that I'm trying to change, going to my doctors, I'm trying to get treatment, I'm trying to help, improve my symptoms. But ultimately, there are things that I just have to live with. And so how do I learn to live with these things? How do I learn to live with an incurable illness? How do I learn to live with a body that, I am just dynamically disabled, and there are times when I literally cannot do the things that I need to do because of my body? How do I approach that? How do I feel about that? And this isn't like a flipping a switch, like, I'm just going to be happy. This is like years of self-work that I think we all really need to do and try to figure out, like, how can we be okay, whatever that means to us, right? Because I know for my own case, I was living in anger rage, just like pure rage for over a decade. I was depressed. And those are, these are things where I don't want to live my life angry and sad. Like I want to live the best life I can, even if every day I don't feel good with my body, I still want to have the best life that I think I can have. Right. So how do we find those tools? How do we cope? How do we get mental health support? How do we find community? All of those are topics that are really, really interesting to me. And those are the kinds of things I talk about apart from disease facts on my platform in 16 years of endometriosis.
There's so many different elements to like chronic illness and disability that people might think, oh, you go to the doctors, you get medication. If you're lucky enough that there is some kind of treatment or management program, and that's just it. But it's so many other things as well. Like you said there, building that community of people who understand what it's like, because it's a life experience that you're living every single day, and having those people around you. And there's so many different things that go into living with chronic illness. You briefly touched on your book there. So when you were writing Finding Peace with Devastating Disease, What was that writing process like for you? Did you have like a plan in mind of what you wanted to cover? Did you just start writing, it just came out?
Um, well, it's interesting because all the time that I was just all this time that I've been sick, I always had a bit of a journal on my computer. So I just go to my computer because, no one was listening to me, no one cared. So that was like the place where I could go and I could just write whatever I was feeling, whether I was angry or upset or scared or grieving, whatever was going on in me, I could go to my computer and I would just type away, like click, 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 click. And I wouldn't, care about what it sounded like, or, and I didn't have to worry about anyone being like, oh my God, you complain so much, or like, you're so negative, or, oh, you're bringing me down with all your hardships. I didn't have to hear anyone making all these comments in regards to like my feelings, and it became this safe space. And so, over the years, I amassed like, oh my gosh, maybe, I don't know, hundreds of pages, 100, 200 pages. And over the years, I saw that like the way that I was writing was starting to change because at the beginning, when you're thrown into that and at such a young age, it was all very, I was so scared and I was so confused and I was so angry. So those writings at the beginning, my early 20s were like, why me? This isn't fair. I want to do whatever I want. I want to eat whatever I want. Like, why is this happening? There's so many why me. The why me was just, if you controlled F why me, it probably appeared like 7,000 times. But and then as I was started doing my inner work, like that was changing. And I started, you know, having writings that were just they were just differently focused, right? They were about like why do I feel so ashamed? They were more like curious, like why do I feel so ashamed of my illness and exploring that? Like why am I so mean to myself and exploring that? Like who taught me to be so mean and critical of myself? So they started like changing over the years. And when I got diagnosed, I started my podcast and and I want to say the podcast is my best friend, Brittany, who's also chronically ill. She doesn't have endometriosis, but she has, yeah, a slew of things like so many of us with chronic illness do. But we had all these like really amazing like mindset talks, and we really started going deep into like these topics, mindsets and tools. And we would be like reading about, different tools and like then talking about in the podcast. And the podcast was really well received. And I was like, oh my gosh, like maybe I want to turn this into a book, right? Like maybe I want to take like everything that I've learned and do this for me, right? So then I just started going through all the writings and kind of pulling out the good ones or pulling out the ones that I liked. And I started, trying to organize it into a book. And yeah, in terms of the book, I really, you know, I understand that I'm at a point in my life 23 years later where like finding peace is like accepting what I live with, and finding peace is at the forefront for me because at this point I personally have seen that after 10 years of being angry, after being depressed, how was that helping me? There's nothing there's nothing wrong with being angry and or being depressed. Like I don't look back and I'm like, why did I do that? No, I look back with eyes of compassion and I hug this younger Amy who was so scared and so confused. But at this point in my life, can see that like I don't want to fall into ways of thinking that I previously had. Like I'm gonna be 40 this year, and I've lived 23 years of my illness. And if I'm lucky, I'll live another 40. And I want to live well. I want to live with joy and meaning and purpose. And I want to know what are my values, and I want to live in a way that's aligned with them. And I have chronic illness, and that is never going away, at least unless a cure is found for endo. And even if a cure is found for endo, I have other things too, like other issues with like mast cell and histamine and, the whole list, right? So how can I be where I am? How can I be in a body that is chronically ill and dynamically disabled and still put a smile on my face? Maybe not every day because we can't always be happy, but like, how can I have moments where I genuinely smile, which I don't think I did from like, 16 to 28 years old, right? Like every smile I had was fake in that time of my life. So I think in writing the book, I was really cognizant of I've had a lot of self and personal growth. But if I was writing to Amy of 16 years ago and I said like, oh, what about finding peace with endometriosis? Like that, Amy would have punched this Amy in the face. So I really wanted to be cognizant of we're all at different spots in our journey. And so with my book, I begin with a lot of just curiosity. So all those writings that I had from like when I was a lot younger, just curiosity about like, why is this happening to me? And like exploring this isn't fair, because you know what? It's not fair. And it's never going to be fair. This is not just, so just really exploring that, like, where am I at now? And like, what might, what might my life look like if I started to accept that I was ill? I don't have to like it. I don't have to say I accept it and I love being ill. I don't love being ill. Who loves being ill? No one, but like, what if I just accepted, okay, I have a chronic illness and like it's part of my life. Like, is there ways that, because I'm saying like, yes, I have a chronic illness, and instead of saying, I don't want this, I just want to go back to my old life. I just want to be better. I just want to, be that 16-year-old again, but saying like, this is where I am. And how are ways that, if I had acceptance, or if I had more peace, or let's just say neutrality, right? If I wasn't angry and hating my life and hating my body and hating my disease, if I was just like, oh, this disease is like, it's just like, how the sky is blue and I don't care and I don't blink about it and I don't like ever think about how the sky is blue. Like, what if I could feel that same way about my disease? Like, what if every time I said I have endometriosis, I didn't feel like I've been punched in the gut and I just felt nothing, the way that when you say the sky is blue, I feel nothing. So it's really started the book of trying to like explore how can I start like being more open and being more curious. So the book kind of goes through this progression of, is peace possible? Would I be able to find it? And then like moving on throughout the book into, more of like, oh, I'm starting to find tools and like going through what those tools are that are helping me be more neutral, that are helping me like move towards peace. And then the end of the book, I don't think peace is an end place. I think peace is, it's something that it's like a intention I've set for myself that like I want to come back to. Sometimes things happen and I'm not in peace. I'm angry. I'm upset. I feel this is unjust. Sometimes I do say, oh God, why, but then I have this intention that I try to make my way back towards a more neutral mindset using some of the different like tools that, I mean, I haven't developed these tools. They're just like tools that people use to try to be more in the moment and at peace.
Amazing. So readers can really expect to sort of get that personal element from yourself of going through that journey, of having that experience, of not having the diagnosis, not being believed by the people that were closest to you, and then coming to a point in your life where you think, I want acceptance now. And that's so powerful. I think the word acceptance, it's such a powerful word. It's very difficult to achieve. I'm trying, I'm on my journey, but I do think it's very admirable. And I think that's what I want to achieve, like get to a point of acceptance, whatever that looks like. And yeah, I think that sounds absolutely amazing. And I noticed that you include self-reflection journaling prompts throughout your book. I was interested to know what your personal favorite prompt was.
Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting that. So that is part of the book, is that, I, because I had so many different writings and stuff, I was like, what if I turn this into like short writings? Because also we know like with chronic illness, it can be really hard to concentrate. It can be hard. It's just hard to like do things. So it's like, what if I have, writings that are short, just like a couple of pages, and they're each like centered around a topic. And then at the end, I have, like, I talk about whatever, whether some of them are like memories. So I do have some in there, like some memories of really hard moments that I faced, or like being in the doctor's office for the first time and just feeling that like sinking fear and wondering, I hope, and like thinking to myself, like, oh my God, I hope this isn't chronic. And then, it totally is chronic illness. But, and then, different writings about like, how am I trying to find more meaning in my life? Like, how am I trying to change the way that I think about my body? And instead of saying, I hate my body, saying like, okay, I'm here with this body and we're in this together. So at the end of all of each reflection of each of my chapters, there's like a little set of reflections that, if the reader wants, they can do them. And I think that's so powerful because I will say like writing the book, a lot of it was like written in the past, like I said, but then of course I did go through and like change things so that it would all flow and like make sense, together as a full book. And doing that was so healing, because sitting down and like, whether that's writing or maybe you take these questions and you like talk about them with your therapist or you talk about them in a support group. I've certainly had people do that. They get my permission and then they're like, we're going to read a chapter together in your book. And then, like maybe they like, or someone reads it out loud, and then they talk about the questions together. And I think that is just so powerful. Like, take that time with ourselves and explore for ourselves, because this is my journey. But like, what is your journey as the reader? What is your journey as a person with a chronic illness, as a person with a disability? And like you said, what does acceptance mean to you? Like, what does a good life mean to you? What is having joy in your life mean to you? What does happiness mean to you? And I think it means something different to all of us. And that's something I really wanted to incorporate in the book, is like, yes, this is my journey, but like, come on it with me, right? Like, read about like how I'm dealing, and then like use these questions to think about, how are you dealing, or how do you want to do things differently? I picked one out. So this one is from a chapter that the self-reflection, the chapter is called The Wisdom of a Butterfly. And basically I just talk about in this, like, how a lot of butterflies only live 2 weeks of their life. Or they only have 2 weeks like on Earth. That's like their lifespan is 2 weeks. And, and sometimes during these 2 weeks, like maybe there's like a rainstorm, and the butterfly, they can't fly in the rain, right? Because they'll get hurt. So they go, and I don't know where they go. Maybe they hide under leaves. I don't know. But they like go someplace and they like chill until the rainstorms passes. And I was just kind of reflecting, like, do they, like, when it's raining, do they cry? Are they like, oh my God, like, I only live 2 weeks, but you know what? It rains like 3 days. Like, that's so unfair. Like, my friend Johnny the butterfly, his 2 weeks was sunny the whole time. Like, are they like crying and whinging and whining? And like, probably not, maybe probably they're not having any kind of advanced thought pattern, but like, as an exercise, just kind of comparing the way that I see my life. And I look at all these moments of quote unquote lost time during which I'm sick. All of that for so long was like lost time to me. And at the same time, I said, oh, this time was lost, 16 years lost. But I was living those 16 years. I was here on this earth, like working and meeting people. And so the reflection is just about like, how can I try to live my best, and like, how can I figure out my intentions and like how I want to live on this earth? So the reflection is just ask, if you only had 2 weeks left to live, what would you want to do? Who would you want to spend that time with? Is there some truth you would speak to someone? Would you go anywhere special? Looking over what you just wrote, keeping in mind the present, what matters to you? Are you living in alignment with your values? How does it make you feel to know that you have more time on this earth? Does it make you want to commit to spending more time with loved ones, speaking any truths, working less, or some other change? If so, then starting today, can you begin changing the way that you're living? So yeah, that's like one of the reflections. And like I said, they're all different depending on, the topic of the story the chapter that I'm doing, but really just like trying to just little questions in short bursts to just make you think a little bit about, again, like, what are your values? Because I also think for so long, I didn't know what my values were. I was just so focused on, I don't want to be sick. I don't want to be sick. Like every day, like my life I was obsessed with, I don't want to be sick. And it's like, Amy, oh my gosh, like you're sick. Like just get over it. You're sick. Oh my God, you've been sick for 23 years. Like you are sick. So like, what else do you want in your life? Like besides not being sick, which you're not going to get, what do you want? Like, what do you want to go after? Like, how do you want to live? So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm reflecting on it now. That's such a powerful thing to just think to yourself, what do you want? This is the life you have. What do you want from it? And taking that power back of, I can decide what I do with my life. I think that's an amazing note to end on today. And thank you so much for coming on, for sharing with me. It's been brilliant to have you as a guest.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Congratulations for your podcast. I think it's a wonderful endeavor, and I'm super excited to listen to all your episodes.
Thank you.